This is the end, beautiful friend. This is the end, my only friend. The end of our elaborate plans. The end of everything that stands. The end, no safety or surprise. The end, I'll never look into your eyes again. Can you picture what will be? So live and set free, desperately in need of some stranger's hand in a desperate land. Lost in a romance, wilderness of pain, and all the children are insane. All the children are insane, waiting for the summer rain. There's danger on the edge of town. Ride the King's Highway. Weird scenes inside the gold mine. Ride the highway west, baby. Ride the snake, ride the snake to the lake, the ancient lake. The snake is long, 7 miles. Ride the snake. He's old and his skin is cold. The West is the best. The West is the best. Good evening, everyone. Who's here then? Bill Booker, Jonathan Smith, Melinda Macaulay-Bett. These aren't just names for me now, they're legends over the years.
Angie Spangle, Ian Moore, Rick Shepherd, there we are, Penny Goodman, Alan Brown. I'm not going to read them all out, but you're all welcome, as you always have been for the last 4 years, to the Nunkie Arms, and you're more than welcome, more ever than ever welcome on tonight's last night of the Nunkie Arms. Now, it was literally almost to the day 4 years ago. It's 21st of March, 2021. But I remember my Facebook memory reminded me that I just put up a post saying, I'm bored and I've got some beer. Who wants to listen to some stories tonight? And thus was born the Nunkie Arms. And the first two stories were stories that I've done since, live, in fact. The Happy Children by Arthur Machen, which is set in Whitby, from where I'm broadcasting today, and the Shouting, I think it was The Shouting by LTC Rolt. But anyway, even though the format is being retired, the essence of the Nunkie Arms will continue. One thing I want to do is to try and make more of my YouTube channel. So, rather than doing 2 unannounced stories over the course of an hour and a half every so often, I'm going to do individual stories decided upon, a long time beforehand, which you can then pick up and watch and rewatch whenever you like. And try and do it, 3 or 4 times a month, maybe more, in the off season. But what fun we've had, eh? And we've travelled. We've been to Viborg in Jutland. We've been to Providence, Rhode Island. And we've been to, this is about the second or third time I've done it from Whitby, I think. And so, and when I do these other stories, you'll still be allowed to drink. You'll still be allowed to tell what the weather's like where you're watching from. The only thing that is slightly different is you won't have the this lovely interaction with me. But there may be a bit of that, and there will be occasional specials, I think, as well. Anyway, what I've done, I've looked through the back catalogue of the Nunkie Arms. I can't remember off the top of my head how many we've done, but there's been more than 30, I think. And I've chosen a couple of stories that you've heard before if you're a regular, but which I myself would like to read again, and I think went down well. So, that's right. I just wanted to say that coming up on Monday is a live. It's the 24th of March. It's Abney Day, of course. So there's a live stream performance, as there always is, of Lost Hearts by M.R. James. And you can find out how to register for that on Eventbrite, on Facebook, or on my website. And then the Friday after that is a free to all reading of a very good weird tale I've wanted to do for a while by Fitzjames O'Brien, who was an Irish-born writer who then emigrated to America, called What Was It? And it's an absolute classic. And in fact, it clearly fed into, I think, what was one of the Nunkie Arms' great successes was the reading I did of The Hauler by Guy de Maupassant, which then became a record released by Cadabra Records. Anyway, this I think is of the Hauler's lineage. So that's free to join in. Now, if you like this kind of thing, I flatter myself that you do, then you might consider becoming a patron of this kind of thing. Because as I say, I want to do more of this stuff on the YouTube channel. And if you, again, go to my Facebook page, or just go to patreon.com and search for my name, Robert Lloyd Parry, you can find out how, in return for various modest sums, you can support this kind of work. But anyway, enough of the. I never wanted the Nunkie Arms to be a kind of have commercials or anything like that, and that was getting close to it then. So we'll forget that. Now I'm going to read a story that I can't remember why I decided to do this. It's long. It's from a book that's long been a favourite of mine. I've always wanted to do something a bit more with, but which I fear would never find much of an audience if it were to kind of travel around the country like the Emma James stuff does. The author is G.K. Chesterton. It's from a book of stories called The Club of Queer Trades. And this is the first story in that collection. And it's called The Tremendous Adventures of Major Brown. I think that Rabelais must have had something to do with the designing of the things in London called flats. You know, there's something entirely gargantuan in the idea of economizing space by piling houses on top of each other. I mean, anything may dwell or happen in the chaos and complexity of these perpendicular streets. And it is in one of them that, if you're lucky and you have your wits about you, you may find the office of the Club of Queer Trades. Now, you might think that a name like that would startle the casual passerby. Not at all. Nothing attracts or startles in these dim, immense hives. Passers-by look only for their own melancholy destinations. You know, a man passes through the twilight passages as one passes through the corridors of a dream. If the thugs set up a stranger's assassination company in one of the great buildings in Norfolk Street and sent in a mild man in spectacles to answer inquiries, no inquiries would be made. And though such it is with the Club of Queer Trades, you know, it carries on its business hidden within a great edifice like a fossil in a mighty cliff of fossils, alongside the Montenegro Shipping Agency and the London office of the Royston Crow. It's an eccentric, bohemian club, and it has one absolute condition of membership, that the candidate must have invented the method by which he earns his living. And it must be an entirely new trade. You know, it can't be a mere application or variation of an existing trade. I mean, the club would not, for instance, admit an insurance agent simply because instead of insuring men's furniture from being burned in a fire, he insured their trousers from being torn by a sea urchin. And the trade must be the support of its venter. That's very important indeed. It must be a genuine commercial source of income. I mean, the club would not receive a man simply because he chose to pass his days collecting broken sardine tins unless he could drive a roaring trade in them. Professor Chick made that quite clear. And when one remembers what Professor Chick's new trade was, well, one doesn't know whether to laugh or cry. Now, the discovery of this strange society was, for me, a curiously refreshing thing. You know, to realize that there were 10 new trades in the world. Well, you know, it made a man feel that he was still in the childhood of the human race. You know, it was like looking at the first ship or the first plough. But that I should have come across so singular a body is not in itself altogether singular, because I have a mania for belonging to as many societies as possible. I rather collect clubs, you see, and I have over the years accumulated a vast and fantastic variety of specimens. Perhaps one day I shall tell you tales of the bodies to which I've belonged, you know, relate the doings of the Dead Man's Shoe Society, you know, explain the origin of the Cat and Christian. I mean, of the 10 teacups, of course, I will not say a word, I daren't. But the world shall perhaps one day know the full details of why the Institute of Typewriters coalesced with the Red Tulip League. For now, however, my revelation shall be concerned with the Club of Queer Trades. You see, I was sitting one evening in the cluttered old garret in Lambeth that belonged to my friend Basil Grant. I was sipping a glass of his gorgeous Burgundy and chewing the fat with his brother, the private detective, Rupert Grant. Basil himself was striding abstractedly about the room, fingering one of the great swords in his collection. I mean, he was a curious man altogether, was Basil. Most remarkable fellow I've ever known, I think. a stargazer, a mystic, you might say. He'd been a High Court judge, a very brilliant one, but he'd gone very publicly insane during a high-profile libel case. Now, I have my own views of that occurrence, but about the facts themselves, there's no question at all. For some months, you see, perhaps even years, people had detected something curious in the judge's conduct. He seemed to have quite lost interest in the law and to be occupied in giving personal and moral advice to the people who came before him. He talked more like a priest or a doctor, and a very outspoken one at that. And the first thrill was probably given when he said to a man who'd attempted a crime of passion, "I sentence you, sir, to 3 years imprisonment under the firm, solemn and God-given conviction that what you require is 3 months at the seaside." The accused criminals from the bench, not so much of their legal crimes, but of things that had never been heard of before in a court of justice, of monstrous egoism, of lack of humour, of morbidity deliberately encouraged. Now, things came to a head in that celebrated case in which the Prime Minister himself had to come forward to give evidence against a former employee. After the detailed life of his household had been thoroughly exhibited, the judge requested the Premier to step forward, and then he said in a sudden grating voice, "Get a new soul, Prime Minister. That thing's not fit for a dog. Get a new soul." Now, all this, however, it was a mere prologue to the melancholy day when his wits fully deserted him in open court. As I said, it was a libel case between two eminent and powerful financiers. Now, the case was long and complicated. The advocates were long and eloquent. But at last, after weeks of work and rhetoric, the time came for the great judge to give a summing up. And one of his celebrated masterpieces of lucidity and pulverizing logic was eagerly looked for. Now, he'd spoken very little during the prolonged affair, and he looked sad and lowering at the end of it. He was silent for a few moments, and then he suddenly burst into song. His remarks, as reported, were as follows: "Oh, routy touty, tiddly outy, tiddly outy po. Oh, highty tighty, tiddly ighty, tiddly ighty ho." He then retired from public life and took the garret in Lambeth. Anyway, on this night, I remember noticing that his eyes were even more than usually bright with dreams, and he just opened his mouth to speak when there was a sudden short rap at the door. Now, Rupert, his brother, who'd been describing some puppet show that he'd seen that afternoon, suddenly looked up. "Aha! That'll be my client. Sorry, Basil, I took the liberty of asking him to look by here this evening. I didn't think you'd mind. Please, come in." Well, a stout, dapper man entered the room. He had a very large head, which was streaked with black and grey, and an abrupt black moustache, which gave the face a fierceness which was rather contradicted by his sad sea blue eyes. He set a silk hat with a clap on the table and bade us good evening. Basil said to me, "Better retire to the next room, I think, Gully." And we were moving towards the door when the stranger spoke. No, friends remain, assistants possibly." Now, the moment that I heard his voice, I remembered who he was. It was Major Brown. I'd met him years before in Basil's company, as a matter of fact. Yeah. I'd entirely forgotten the immaculate suit and the large solemn head, but I did remember his peculiar way of speech, the way that he only ever say about a quarter of each sentence, and that sharply, like the crack of a gun, as if he were giving orders to troops. Now, the Major was a distinguished fellow, of VC, in fact, but he was far from what you would call warlike. Like so many of those iron men who recovered British India, he was possessed of the natural beliefs and tastes of an old woman. His wardrobe was dapper but demure. In his habits, He was precise to the point of the exact adjustment of a teacup. And his one overriding enthusiasm, which was of the nature of a religion to him, was the cultivation of pansies. I mean, when he talked about his collection of pansies, the same eyes that had remained untroubled when the troops were warring victory round Roberts at Kandahar glittered like a child's at a new toy. "Well, Major," said Rupert Grant, flinging himself into a chair, "pray, tell us now, what is the matter?" "Yellow pansies, coal cellar, PG Northover." I beg your pardon. "Fact is, street, man, pansies, up on wall, death threat, preposterous, lady." Now, bit by bit, we pieced together the Major's story. Now, it would be infamous for me to submit to you what we endured, so I will tell Major Brown's story in my words, not his. But now imagine the scene. The eyes of Basil Grant closed as if in a trance, while the eyes of Rupert and myself grew rounder and rounder as we listened to the astonishing adventure from the lips of the little man in black, sitting bolt upright in his chair, talking like a telegram. It was, it seems, a bright and windy afternoon as the Major set out for his usual constitutional. He was crossing from one great residential street to another when he happened to pass by one of those rather gloomy lanes which lie along the back garden walls of a row of mansions. I mean, these places, they always give me the rather odd sensation of being behind the scenes of a theatre. But you see, mean and sulky as the scene might have been to the eyes of most of us, it was not so to the eyes of the Major, because along the coarse gravel footway was coming something which to him was what a passing religious procession is to a mendicant friar. A large, heavy man with an irradiating red beard was pushing a wheelbarrow ablaze with incomparably beautiful flowers. I mean, there were specimens of almost every order, but pansies predominated. Now the Major stopped and fell into conversation, and then into bargaining. He carefully and with a sort of anguish selected the best routes from the less excellent, praised some, disparaged others, made a suitable scale ranging from a thrilling worth and rarity to a degraded insignificance, and then he bought them all. The man was just moving on when he stopped and came closer to the Major. "Tell you what, sir, if you're interested in them things, you just get out on that wall." "What?" "Yeah, finest show of yellow pansies in England in that there garden, sir. Here, I'll help you up." Well, somehow it happened. The positive enthusiasm of the Major's life triumphed over all its negative traditions, and with a leap and a swing that showed he was in no need of physical assistance, he stood up on the wall that divided the lane from the grounds of the house that backed onto it. Now, the flapping of his frock coat at his knees made him feel a terrible fool. But the next instant, all such trifling sentiments vanished, as the old soldier was shaken by the most violent shock of surprise he'd ever felt in all his bold and wandering existence. His eyes fell upon a broad lawn, across a large bed, in the centre of which was a vast pattern of pansies. They were the most beautiful flowers, but it was not their horticultural aspects that left Major Brown slack-jawed, because the pansies were arranged in gigantic capital letters, and they formed a very simple sentence, 4 words long: "Death to Major Brown." There was no full stop. Well, the Major looked sharply back at the road behind him, but the man with the wheelbarrow had vanished. And then he looked again at the lawn with this incredible inscription. I mean, it's impossible to describe the effect of that quiet and sunny garden scene, or at least the Major found it so, as he sat recalling it to us, and he was silent for what seemed like a few minutes. But all of us, I think, could imagine his horror and confusion on that still summer's evening, the grass golden, the little flowers he so adored, crying to heaven for his blood. I mean, a civilian might have thought that he'd gone mad, but you see, the Major did not think that. I mean, another man might have thought himself a victim of a practical joke, but Brown could tell at once that the floral arrangement was an elaborate and very expensive one. I mean, it was extravagantly improbable that anyone would pour money like that for a joke against him. Having no explanation to offer, he simply stood at the top of the wall and watched, as he might have done in the presence of a centaur, or one of those fellows who have faces in their chests and are dewlapped like bulls. A picturesque old man with white whiskers was watering the flowers he now saw. And this old horticulturist suddenly looked up and squinted at Dr. Brown. "Who are you?" "I am Major Brown." The watering can fell from the old man's hand and he began to tremble, and then he bolted for the house in a sort of waddling run. Now the Major leapt down from the wall and pursued him through the back passages of a gloomy but smartly appointed house. At the door of the front room, the old man turned to him, a face of apoplectic terror dimly showing in the twilight. "For heaven's sake, man, don't mention the jackals!" He then threw open the door, releasing a burst of red lamplight, and ran downstairs with a clatter. The Major doffed his hat and stepped into a rich, glowing room full of red copper and peacock feathers. Now, he had the finest manners in the world, and though mystified, he was not in the least embarrassed to see that the only occupant was a lady sitting by the window looking out. She's a rather graceful figure, clad in green, with fiery red hair and a whiff of Bedford Park. "Madam, I am Major Brown." She didn't turn her head. "You have come, I suppose," she said, "to tax me about the hateful title deeds." "I have come, madam, to know what is the matter, and to know why my name is written across your garden in no amicable way. You know that I cannot turn round. Every afternoon until the stroke of 6, I must keep my face turned to the street." "Well, it's almost 6 now," he said, and even as he spoke, the clock on the wall clanged the first stroke of that hour. At the 6th, the lady rose and turned to the Major to reveal one of the queerest and most beautiful faces he'd ever seen in his life. Open, tantalizing. It was the face of an elf. "This is the 3rd year I have waited, Major Brown. Tonight is the anniversary. The waiting almost makes one wish the frightful thing would happen once and for all." But even as she spoke, a sudden rending cry from the street broke the stillness. "Major Brown! Major Brown! Where does the jackal dwell?" Brown strode decisively to the front door and looked out. The one or two lamps were beginning to light their lemon sparks, but there was no sign of life in the blue gloaming of the street. He turned back and found the woman in green trembling. "It is the end," she said. "The end. It may be death for both of us. Whenever," but her speech was cloven again by another horribly articulate proclamation. "Major Brown! Major Brown! How did the jackal die?" Brown dashed out of the door, this time down the steps. But again, there was no one in sight. Now, I mean, the street was far too long and empty for the shouter to have run away, and even the rational Major was a little shaken as he returned to the drawing room. Scarcely had he got there than that terrific voice came again. "Major Brown! Major Brown! Where did—" And this time Brown was out in the street in one bound, in time to see something which at first glance froze the blood. Because the cries appeared to come from a decapitated head resting on the pavement. In an instant, it vanished, and now the Major understood. He turned again to the lady. "Where is your coal cellar, madam? You will not go down alone into that dark hole," she said, "with that beast." But Brown was already descending the kitchen stairs 3 at a time. He flung open the door, feeling in his pocket for his matches, and as he did so, a pair of great slimy hands came out of the darkness, hands that clearly belonged to a man of gigantic stature, and which seized him by the back of the head and forced him down into the suffocating darkness. But you see, the Major's head, although upside down, was perfectly clear and intellectual. He gave quietly under the pressure until he'd slid down almost to his hands and knees, and then finding the knees of the invisible monster within a foot of him, he put out his long, bony, skillful hands and, gripping the leg by a muscle, pulled it off the ground. The huge man fell with a crash to the floor, and Brown was on him like a cat. The two rolled over and over, the giant sprawling hither and thither to get out of the door, and the Major clinging to his coat collar with one hand and hanging with the other to a beam. Under the strain of holding back this human bull, the Major expected his hand to rend and part from his arm, but instead something else rent and parted, and the dim, bulky giant fled with impossible speed from the cellar, leaving his torn coat in the Major's hand. Now, that was the only fruit of his adventure and the only clue to the mystery, because when he went upstairs, he found only bare boards and whitewashed walls, the rich hangings, the whole equipment of the house, the beautiful elf. All had disappeared. Well, I mean, she was part of the conspiracy, of course, said Rupert, when the remarkable story had concluded. The beautiful woman, I mean. Major Brown turned brick red. "Beg your pardon, sir, but that I will not believe." Rupert raised his eyebrows and looked at him for a moment. "Well, was there anything in the pockets of the coat?" "There was 7 halfpenny in coppers and a threepenny bit. There was a cigarette holder, a piece of string, and this letter." He unfolded a piece of paper and read aloud. "Dear Mr. Plover, I'm annoyed to hear that some delay has occurred in the arrangements for Major Brown. Please see that he is attacked as per arrangement tomorrow. The coal cellar, of course. Yours faithfully, P.G. Northover." I mean, is it dated from anywhere? "Yes, number 14 Tanner's Court." "Well then, what are we waiting for?" said Rupert. Let's get there now. Basil, lend me your revolver." Now Basil was staring into the fire like a man in a trance, and it was some time before he answered. "Oh, I don't think you'll need a weapon, Rupert." "Well, perhaps not, Basil, but one never knows. It's as well to be cautious going down a dark court to confront criminals." "Oh, do you think they're criminals?" "What?" "Well, sorry, giving orders to a subordinate to strangle a harmless stranger in a coal cellar might strike you as a blameless experiment. But no. But Rupert, do you think they wanted to strangle the Major?" "Oh, my dear fellow, Basil, have you been asleep? Look at the letter." I am looking at the letter," although, as a matter of fact, he was looking at the fire. "And I just don't think it's the sort of letter that one criminal would write to another." "Oh, my dear brother, you are glorious. Read it, man." It clearly gives orders for a crime. I mean, you might as well say that Nelson's column is not the sort of thing that one was likely to see set up in Trafalgar Square. That's rather good, Rupert. That's really rather good. But no, you see, of course, logic like that isn't what's wanted here. No, it's a question of spiritual atmosphere. You know, that is not a criminal letter. It is, Basil. It is, as a matter of fact. Facts, yes. But you see, how often facts obscure the truth? I may be silly, in fact, I am. I'm famously off my head. But you see, I could never believe in that man. Well, what's his name in those wonderful old stories? Sherlock Holmes. Yeah, every detail points to something, certainly, but generally the wrong thing. Your facts, they point in all directions, it seems to me, like twigs of a tree. It's only the life of the tree that has unity and goes up. It's only the green blood that springs like a fountain at the stars. I mean, suppose now, Rupert, you went out into the moonlight. Suppose you passed through silent, silvery streets until you came into an open and deserted place set with a few monuments, and you beheld a figure dressed as a ballet girl dancing in the argent glamour. And suppose that you looked closer and you saw that it was a man disguised as a ballet girl. And suppose you looked yet again and you saw that it was Lord Kitchener. Well, what would you think, Rupert? I mean, would you adopt the ordinary explanation? I mean, the ordinary explanation of putting on singular clothes is that you look nice in them. But you wouldn't think that Lord Kitchener, dressed like a ballet girl out of ordinary personal vanity. No, you'd think it much more likely that he'd inherited a dancing sickness from a great-grandmother, or he'd been hypnotized at a seance, or threatened by a secret society with death if he refused the ordeal. I mean, with Baden-Powell, I dare say it might be a bet, but not with Kitchener. No, I know, because in my public days, I actually knew him quite well. And I also know that letter quite well, and I know criminals quite well, Rupert, and I can tell you that that is not a criminal's letter. All in the atmospheres, you see. And he closed his hands and eyes and put his hand over his forehead. Now, Rupert and the Major were regarding him with a mixture of respect and pity. All right, well, I'm going anyway, said Rupert, and I will continue to think that a man who sends a note recommending a crime that is actually carried out, at least tentatively, is in all probability a little casual in his moral tastes. So please, Basil, will you lend me your revolver? All right, said Basil, but I'm coming with you. And he flung an old cape around him and took a sword stick from the corner. You? Basil, you scarce ever leave your hole to look at anything on the face of the earth. That, Rupert, is because I scarcely ever hear of anything on the face of the earth that I do not understand at once. And he led the way out into the purple night. Well, we swung along the flaring Lambeth streets across Westminster Bridge and along the embankment in the direction of Fleet Street and Tanner's Court. The ramrod figure of Major Brown, seen from behind, was a quaint contrast to the hound-like stoop of Rupert Grant, who enthusiastically adopted all the dramatic poses of the detective of popular fiction. Basil, who walked behind with his face turned blindly to the stars, had the look of a somnambulist. Rupert paused at the corner of Tanner's Court and gripped Basil's revolver in his greatcoat pocket. Well, Major, shall we go in? Not get police? I'm not sure, Major. Of course, it's quite clear the thing is crooked, but there are three of us, and no. Major, I shouldn't get the police, said Basil. Rupert glared at him. Basil, you're trembling. What's the matter? Are you afraid? And then, after a few moments' scrutiny, Rupert broke into a curse. Damn you! You're laughing! I know that confounded, silent, shaky laugh of yours. What the deuce is the adducement, Basil? Here we are, within a yard of a den of ruffians. No, I just mean I shouldn't call the police, Rupert, said Basil. No, we four heroes, I think, are quite equal to a host. And he continued to quake with his mysterious mirth. Rupert turned with impatience and strode swiftly down the court, the rest of us following. When he reached the door of number 14, he turned abruptly, the revolver now glittering in his hand. Right, now stand close, fellows. The scoundrel may be attempting to escape at the moment. When I get to 4, follow me in. If I say hold him, pin the fellows down. If I say stop, stop. If I say that, I'll say that if there are more than 4 of them. If they attack us, I shall empty my revolver upon them. And Basil, you have your sword stick. Ready? Good. Right then. 1, 2, 3, 4. The door was burst open and we fell into the room like an invasion. Only to stop dead. The ordinary and neatly appointed office appeared at first glance to be empty. But on a second and more careful glance, we saw seated behind a very large desk a small man with a black waxed moustache and the air of a very average clerk. He looked up as we came to a standstill. Oh, did you knock? I'm sorry if I didn't hear. What can I do for you? There was a doubtful pause, and then, by general consent, the Major himself stepped forward. The letter was in his hand, and he looked unusually grim. Is your name P.G. Northover? Yes, it is. I think, then, that this letter was written by you. The man called Northover looked it over with unaffected interest and nodded. Yes, that's right. Well, sir, what about it? What about it what? I am Major Brown. Pleased to meet you, sir. Well, what have you to say to me? Say? I want those confounded things settled, man. I want... Oh, certainly, Major Brown, of course. Will you please take a chair for a moment? And Northover rang a bell on his desk. Now the Major put his hand on the back of the chair offered to him, but he stood, chafing and beating the floor with his polished boot. The next moment an inner glass door was opened and a weedy young man in a frock coat entered from within. Ah, Mr. Hobson, this is Major Brown. Yes, will you finish that thing for him I gave you this morning and bring it in? So you'll excuse me, gentlemen, if I continue to work until Mr. Hobson is ready. I have some books that must be cleared up before I go on my holiday tomorrow, and we all like a whiff of the countryside, don't we? The criminal took up his pen with a childlike laugh, and a silence ensued. A placid and busy silence on the part of P.G. Northover, and a raging silence on the part of everybody else. At length, the scratching of Northover's pen in the stillness was mingled with a knock at the door, and Mr. Hobson came in again, placed a paper before his principal, and disappeared. Now the man at the desk pulled and twisted his spiky moustache for a few moments as he ran his eye up and down the paper. He took up his pen with a slight frown and altered something. Then he read it again, and finally he handed it to the frantic Brown, whose hand was beating the devil's tattoo on the back of the chair. Yes, I think you'll find that all right, Major. The Major looked at it. Now, whether he found it all right or not, you will soon hear. But what he found was this. Major Brown to P.G. Northover. January 1st to account rendered £5 6. May the 9th to potting and embedding of zoo pansies £2. The cost of trolley with flowers 15 shillings. Hiring of man with trolley 5 shillings. Hire of house and garden for 1 day £1. Furnishing of room in Peacock curtains, copper ornaments, etc., £3. Salary of Miss Jameson, £1. Salary of Mr. Plover, £1. Total, £14 6 shillings. A remittance will oblige. What in heaven's name is this? Said the Major. Oh, sorry, it's your bill, of course. My bill? Well, what am I supposed to do with it? Oh, well, naturally, Major, I'd prefer you to pay it. Now, the Major's hand was still resting on the back of the chair as those words came. He scarcely stirred otherwise, but he lifted the chair bodily into the air with one hand and hurled it at Northover's head. The legs crashed against the desk, so Northover only got a blow on the elbow as he sprang up with clenched fists, only to be seized by the united rush of the rest of us. The chair had fallen clattering on the empty floor. "Let me go, you scamps! Let me stand still!" cried Rupert. "Major Brown's action is excusable. The abominable crime that you have attempted, a customer has a perfect right to question an alleged overcharge, but not to throw furniture, confound it. What do you mean? What customer?" Major Brown's keen feminine nature became almost hysterical in the presence of the long and exasperating mystery. "Who the devil are you, Nan? I know nothing about your tomfool bills. I know that one of your hired brutes tried to choke me." "You're mad! You're all of you quite mad!" squeaked Northover. "Enough of this prevarication, man," said Rupert. "Your crimes are discovered, Northover. A policeman is stationed outside, and I will take the responsibility of telling you myself that anything that you may say—" "Mr. Brown," this was Basil Grant. "Major Brown, do you mind if I just ask you a question?" "Well, yes, certainly, of course, Mr. Grant." Well, can you tell me the name of the man who lived in your house before you?" Yes. Yes, I think so. A man named Gurney something, his name with a hyphen. Gurney Brown, that was it. Louis Gurney Brown. And when did this house change hands? Well, I moved in last month. And at the mere word, the criminal Northover suddenly fell into his office chair and shouted with a volleying laughter. "Oh, no, never! Oh, it is too perfect, too exquisite." His laughter was deafening. Basil Grant was laughing noiselessly, and the rest of us felt that our heads were like weathercocks in a whirlwind. "Confound it, Basil," said Rupert. "If you don't want me to go mad and blow your metaphysical brains out with your revolver, tell me what this is all about." Northover rose. "Permit me to explain, gentlemen. But first of all, permit me to apologize to you, Major Brown, for a most abominable and unpardonable blunder, which has caused you menace and inconvenience, and in which, if you will allow me to say so, you have behaved with astonishing courage and dignity. And of course, you need not trouble about the bill. We will stand the loss." Tearing the paper across, he flung the halves into the room. Poor Brown's face was still a picture of distraction. I don't even begin to understand," he cried. What bill? What blunder? What loss?" Mr. P.G. Northover advanced into the centre of the room thoughtfully and with a great deal of unconscious dignity. On closer consideration, there were apparent about him other things than a screwed moustache, especially a lean, sallow face, hawk-like, and not without a certain careworn intelligence. Then he looked up abruptly. "Do you know where you are, Major?" "I do not, sir." "Well, you are standing in the office of the Adventure and Romance Agency Limited." "What?" "Major, did you ever, as you walked along the empty street upon some idle afternoon, feel the utter hunger for something to happen? Something, in the splendid words of Walt Whitman, pernicious and dread. Something far removed from a puny and pious life, something unproved, something in a trance, something loosed from its anchorage and driving free. Did you ever feel that, Major? No. Well, then I must explain with more elaboration. The Adventure and Romance Agency has been started to meet a modern desire. On every side, in conversation and in literature, we hear of the desire for a larger theatre of events, for something to waylay us and lead us splendidly astray. Now, the man who feels this desire pays a yearly or a quarterly sum to the Adventure and Romance Agency, and in return, the Adventure and Romance Agency undertakes to surround him with startling and weird events. As a man is leaving his front door, an excited chimney sweep rushes up and assures him of a plot against his life. He gets into a cab and is driven to an opium den. He receives a mysterious telegram or a dramatic visit and is immediately in a vortex of intrigue. A picturesque and moving story is first carefully plotted by one of the staff of distinguished novelists who are at present hard at work in the adjoining room. And then, well, in fact, your story was designed by our Mr. Grigsby, Major Brown, and I must say that I consider it a peculiarly forcible and pointed narrative. It's almost a pity that you didn't get to the end. But I need hardly explain further the monstrous mistake that has been made here. You see, your predecessor in your present house, Mr. Gurney Brown, was a subscriber to our agency, and our foolish clerks, ignoring alike the dignity of the hyphen and the glory of the military rank, foolishly imagined that Major Brown and Mr. Gurney Brown were the same person. Now, you've been hurled, I'm sorry to say, into the middle of another man's story. Well, how on earth does the thing work? Said Rupert. Oh, well, we believe that we're doing noble work, said Northover. It's continually struck us that there's no element in modern life that is more lamentable than the fact that modern man has to seek all his artistic existence sitting down. If he wishes to float into fairyland, he reads a book. If he wishes to dash into the thick of battle, he reads a book. If he wishes to slide down the banisters, he reads a book. Now, we at the agency give him all these visions, but we give him healthy exercise at the same time, the necessity of climbing a wall, of fighting strange gentlemen, of running down streets from pursuers. We give him a glimpse of that great morning world of Robin Hood or the knights errant, when one great game was played under the splendid sky. We give him back, I hold, his childhood. That godlike time, and we can act stories, be our own heroes, and at the same instant dance and dream. And as the little man ceased speaking, he had the blazing eyes of a fanatic. Of course, said Major Brown after a moment. Awfully dense of me. Scheme excellent, no doubt. But I don't think... The Major paused for a moment and looked dreamily out of the window. Don't think you'll find me in it. Somehow when one's seen the thing itself, blood, battle, men dying, Well, a little house, a pleasant hobby, in the Bible, there remaineth the rest. Northover bowed. Of course, Major. But gentlemen, may I offer you my card? If any of the rest of you desire at any time to communicate with me. Oh, and I'll take your card, sir. Pay for the chair. The agent of Romance and Adventure handed his card with a broad smile. It ran P.G. Northover, B.A., CQT, Adventure and Romance Agency, 14 Tanner's Court, Fleet Street. What on earth is CQT? Asked Rupert, looking over the Major's shoulders. Haven't you heard of the Club of Queer Trades? Said Northover. No, there seems to be a confounded lot of funny things I haven't heard of. What's this one? Oh, well, the Club of Queer Trades, said Northover, is a society consisting exclusively of people who've invented some new and curious way of making money. I was one of its earliest members. You deserve to be, said Basil, taking up his great white hat and speaking for the first time that evening. Come on, fellows. Let's leave Mr. Northover to ply his trade. Hold on. One moment, said the Major. Absurd, I realise, but upon my soul I feel the most desperate desire to know the end of it all. But the end of it all, Major? Yeah, you know, jackals, title deeds, death to Major Brown. Oh, I'm terribly sorry, Major. I don't know anyone I'd sooner oblige than you, but the rules of the agency are very strict. No, the adventures are strictly confidential, and you are, I'm afraid, an outsider. I'm certainly not allowed to let you know an inch more than I can help. I hope you understand that. There is no one, Mr. Northover, who understands discipline better than I do. Thank you very much, sir. Good night. Now, the Major actually married Miss Jameson. She was the lady of the red hair and the green garments, really. She was an actress employed, with many others, by the romance agency, and her marriage to the prim old veteran caused some stir in her languid and intellectualized set. But you see, when asked about it, she always replied very quietly that she had met scores of men who acted splendidly in the charades provided for them by Mr. Northover, but she'd only ever met one who went down into a coal cellar when he really thought that it did contain a murderer. The Major and her live happily as birds in a funny little villa in Battersea. The Major's taken to smoking, but otherwise he's otherwise unchanged, except perhaps there are moments when, alert and full of feminine unselfishness as the Major is by nature, he falls into a trance of abstraction. And then his wife recognizes with a concealed smile, by the blind look in his blue eyes, that he's wondering, why on earth was he not allowed to mention jackals? But like so many old soldiers, Brown is religious, and he believes that he will realise the rest of those purple adventures in a better world. That's it. That's the end of the first story tonight. Let's go. I think it's a good story. I think it needs a bit of. There are rather too many characters in it to kind of do it to do it like this. But you know, it could be condensed quite well, I think. But just a charming idea and a modern idea, I think. Oh, hang on. There we are. It's. There we are. Oh, there we are. Sorry, I this had got stuck in the comments. That's right. That's right, Ian. Well, you said that last time, remember, Ian? The adventure of LARPing, live action role play game, live action role playing. Yeah. And also the other thing, there's a very good film which I remember talking about last time. I can't remember what it's called now, with Michael Douglas, where he gets involved in one of these kind of paid for conspiracies that, like Major Brown. So how are we doing? The game. That's it. The game. That's right. And I remember when I read that before, I did go and watch the game again, and it's very tense. Good. All right then. So, well, listen. Share with me your memories of the Nunkie Arms. The film was the game. Yes, it was. Oh, does it? I've read the Major. So I remember that was a. Oh yeah, I did read it when I was a certain age, and it meant a great deal to me, but I'm afraid I can remember very little of it now. Yeah. Oh, thank you, Maura. Or Mara. Yeah. Good. Oh, very good to meet you again. Yeah. Well, yes. The pub is closing, as I say, but the it's what it provides will live on in a kind of different way. So I did put out a call for you to suggest on Facebook stories for tonight, and someone did suggest one of the Club of Queer Trades. But I got I was rather I got a precious few other suggestions. So obviously it's too late to suggest one now. But what? Oh, okay. That sounds good, Ed. Father Brown. Okay. I remember. Well, yeah, the hauler was one that I remember well because that, as I say, led to other things. Well, as usual, I just need to go and freshen up, have a little, I've drunk a pint of beer, so I need to, I won't go into too many details, but, just stick around. Oh, there we are, the stories in India. I'd forgotten about them. One of them was the haunted rickshaw, which I remember, even as I read it, thinking this isn't working quite well. But yeah, okay. Thank you, Anthony. Anyway, yes, I'll be back in a sec. Stick around, talk among yourselves. I'm just going to just have a comfort break. There's a famous seaside place called Blackpool that's noted for fresh air and fun. And Mr. and Mrs. Ramsbottom went there with young Albert, their son. A grand little lad was young Albert, all dressed in his best, quite a swell, with a stick with an horse's head handle, the finest that Woolworths could sell. They didn't think much of the ocean, the waves, they was fiddling and small. There was no wrecks and nobody drowned. Fact, nothing to laugh at all. So seeking for further amusement, they paid and went into the zoo, where they'd lions and tigers and camels and old ale and sandwiches too. There were one great big lion called Wallace, His nose were all covered with scars. He lay in a somnolent posture, with his face at the side of the bars. Now Albert had heard about lions, how they was ferocious and wild. To see Wallace lying so peaceful, well, it didn't seem right to the child. So straightway the brave little fella, not showing a morsel of fear, took his stick with his horse's head handle and pushed it in Wallace's ear. You would see that the lion didn't like it, for giving a kind of a roll, he pulled Albert inside the cage with him and swallowed the little lad whole. Then Pa, who had seen the occurrence and didn't know what to do next, said, "Mother, yon lion's at Albert." And Mother said, "Well, I am vexed." Then Mr. and Mrs. Ramsbottom, quite rightly, when all's said and done, complained to the animal keeper that the lion had eaten their son. The keeper was quite nice about it. He said, "What a nasty mishap. Are you sure that it's your boy he's eaten?" Pa said, "Am I sure? Look, there's his cap." The manager had to be sent for. He came and said, "What's to do?" Pa said, "Yon lion's at Albert, and him in his Sunday clothes too." Then Mother said, Right, young fella. I think it's a shame and a sin for a lion to go and eat Albert, and after we've paid to come in." The manager wanted no trouble. He took out his purse right away, saying, "How much to settle the matter?" And Pa said, "What do you normally pay?" But Mother had turned a bit awkward. When she thought where her Albert had gone, she said, "No, someone's got to be summoned." So that was decided upon. Then off they went to the police station. In front of the magistrate chap, they told him what happened to Albert and proved it by showing his cap. The magistrate gave his opinion that no one was really to blame, and he said that he hoped the Ramsbottoms would have further sons to their name. At that, Mother got proper blazing. "And thank you, sir, kindly," she said. "What, waste all our lives raising children to feed ruddy lions? Not me." There we are. Sorry about that. Oh. So, yes, now. I've made some notes I need to read from. Hold on, I'm just going to find some notes. All right. Well, I can't remember. They're in among all the papers on the floor. Anyway, so yes, what's going on? Yeah. Yeah. Oh, Kadambra release. Yes. Well, there's something in the pipeline, hopefully. Good. Yeah, okay. So there we are. You know. Okay. Well, look. So the next story is one I've done several times. So you see, people were saying they like the Treasure Albert Thomas and so on. That was never a Nunkie Arms story. You got to distinguish between this casual Nunkie Arms, vibe and the other live streams that I do. And unfortunately, it's this vibe that is being retired, at least for now. So what I'm going to do now is, Maura. We're going to do an M.R. James story now, as he is kind of, the eminence grise behind all of this. Now, I'm going to have to, because I'm having trouble with my printer, I'm going to have to read it from the screen. But that should work all right. I think I've done this before. I just need to do a little bit of clicking. And I'm going to pop the chat. Oh, no, maybe not. Maura. Okay, Maura around the floor. That's good to know. Okay, so this story, I've done it a few times, and I'm pretty sure it was a Nunkie Arms, because I think I did early on. It was billed as M.R. James's worst ghost story, which I think people have described it as, but I think it's the kind of one, and it certainly happened with me, but the more one reads it, the more one appreciates it. And I think, far from being a kind of failure on his part, I think it's just, oh, I'm sorry, I'm trying to do something, oh well. Anyway, let's see how it goes. Okay, you may have guessed, anyway, it is Two Doctors by M.R. James. Actually, one thing, I'm just going to get a glass to put my beer into. I got a little kind of feedback when I was taking a drink break in the last story. Okay, Two Doctors by M.R. James. It's a very common thing, in my experience, to find papers shut up in old books, but it's one of the rarest things to come across any that are at all interesting. Still, it does happen, and one should never destroy them unlooked at. Now, it was a practice of mine before the war, occasionally to buy old ledgers of which the paper was good and which possessed a good many blank leaves, and to extract these leaves and use them for my own notes and writings. And one such I purchased for a small sum in 1911. I mean, it was a tightly clasped volume, and its boards were warped by having for years been obliged to embrace a number of extraneous sheets. Now, 3/4 of this inserted matter had lost all vestige of interest for any living human being. One bundle, however, had not. Now, that it belonged to a lawyer is certain, because it is endorsed "the strangest case that I ever met," and it bears initials and an address at Gray's Inn. Now, it is only the materials for a case, and it consists mainly of statements by a number of possible witnesses. The man who would have been the defendant or prisoner seems never to have appeared. The dossier is not complete, unfortunately, but such as it is, it furnishes a riddle in which the supernatural appears to play a part. Now, you'll have to see what you can make of it yourselves, but, well, the following is the setting as I elicit it. Dr. Abel was walking one afternoon in his garden, waiting for his horse to be brought round so that he might set out on his visits for the day. Now, as the place was Islington, the month June, and the year 1718, we can, I think, conceive the surroundings of being countrified and pleasant. To Dr. Abel entered his confidential servant, Luke Jennett, who had been with him for 20 years. "I said that I wished to speak to him," said Jennett. I'm quoting from the dossier now. "And what I had to say might take some quarter of an hour. He accordingly bade me go into his study, which was a room opening on the terrace path where he was walking, and he came in himself and sat down. I told him that, much against my will, I must look for another place. He inquired what was my reason, in consideration that I had been so long with him, and I said that if he would excuse me, he would do me a great kindness, because I was one that always liked to have everything pleasant about me. As well as I can remember, he said that that was his case likewise, but he would wish to know why I should change my mind after so many years. And, says he, you know that there can be no talk of a remembrance of you in my will if you leave my service now. I said I'd made my reckoning of that. Then, he says, you must have some complaint to make, and if I could, I would willingly set it right. And at that I told him, not seeing how I could keep it back, the matter of my former affidavit and of the bedstaff in the dispensing room, and said that a house where such things happened was no place for me. At which he, looking very black upon me, called me a fool, and said he would pay what was owing to me in the morning, and so, his horse being waiting, he went off. That night I lodged with my sister's husband near Battle Bridge, and came early next morning to my late master, who then made a great matter that I had not lain in his house, and stopped a crown out of my wages owing. After that I took service here and there, not for long at a time, and saw no more of him until I came to be Dr. Quinn's man at Dodd's Hall in Islington. So that's Luke Jennett's testimony. Now, I mean, you'll have noticed one very obscure part in that statement, namely the reference to the former affidavit and the matter of the bedstaff. Now, the former affidavit, I'm afraid, is not among the bundle of papers. I fear that it is perhaps taken out to read because of its special oddity and never put back. And of what nature the story was may be guessed at later, but as yet no clue has been put into our hands. The rector of Islington, Dr. Jonathan Pratt, is the next step forward, and he furnishes particulars of the standing and reputation of Doctors Abel and Quinn, both of whom lived and practiced in his parish. It is not to be supposed, he says, that a physician should be a regular attendant at morning and evening prayers or at the Wednesday lectures, but within the measure of their ability, I would say that both these persons fulfilled their obligations as loyal members of the Church of England. Yet at the same time, as you desire to know my private mind, I must say, in the language of the schools, distinguo. Dr. Quinn, you see, was to my eye a plain, honest believer, not inquiring over closely into points of belief, but squaring his practice to what lights he had. Dr. Abel was a source of more perplexity, and he interested himself in questions to which Providence, as I hold, designs no answer to be given us in this state. He would ask me, for example, what place I believed those beings now to hold in the scheme of creation, which are thought by some neither to have stood fast when the rebel angels fell, nor to have joined with them to the full pitch of their transgression. But as was suitable, my first answer to him was another question. What warrant had he for supposing any such beings to exist? Because that there were none in Scripture, I took it that he was aware. And it appeared that he grounded himself on such passages as that of the satyr, which Jerome tells us conversed with Antony in the desert. But he thought too that some parts of Scripture might be cited in support. And besides, he said, you notice the universal belief among those that spend their night and days abroad. And I would add that if your calling took you so continuously as mine does about the country lanes by night, you might not be so surprised as I see you to be by my suggestion. Well, then, I said, you must be of John Milton's mind, and hold that millions of spiritual creatures walk the earth unseen, both when we wake and when we sleep. I do not know why Milton should have said unseen, he replied, although, to be sure, he was blind when he wrote that. But for the rest, yes, sir, I think he was in the right. Well, I said, though not so often as you, I am not seldom called abroad pretty late, but I've no mind of meeting a satyr in our Islington lanes in all the years that I've been here. And if you've had better luck, I'm sure that the Royal Society will be glad to know of it. Now, I'm reminded of these trifling expressions because Dr. Abel took them very ill, stamping out of the room in a huff with some such word as that these high and dry parsons had no eyes but for a prayer book or a pint of wine. But you see, that was not the only time that our conversation took a remarkable turn. There was one evening when he came in, at first seeming gay and in good spirits, but afterwards, as he sat and smoked by the fire, he fell into a musing way, out of which to rouse him, I said pleasantly that I supposed he'd had no further meetings with his odd friends. Now, the question did indeed most effectively arouse him, because he looked wildly at me and said in terror, "You were never there. I never saw you there. What about you?" And then in a more collected tone, "Sire, what do you say about a meeting? I believe that I must have been in a doze." To which I answered that I was thinking of fawns and centaurs in the dark lane and not of a witch's Sabbath, but it seemed that he took it differently. "Well," he said, "I can plead guilty to neither, but I find you very much more of a sceptic than becomes your cloth. And if you care to know about the dark lane, you might do worse than ask my housekeeper that lived at the other end of it when she was a child." "Yes," I said, "and ask the old women in the almshouse and the children in the kennel. Oh gosh, if I were you, Dr. Abel, I'd send to your brother Quinn for a bolus to clear your brain." "Damn Quinn," says he. "Talk no more of him. He's embezzled 4 of my best patients this month. I believe that is that cursed man of his Jennet that used to be with me. His tongue is never still. It should be nailed to the pillar if he had his deserts." Now, this I may say was the only time that he indicated to me that he had any grudge against either Dr. Quinn or Jennet, and as was my business, I did my best to persuade him that he was mistaken in them. Yet it couldn't be denied, though, that some respectable families in the parish had given him the cold shoulder, and for no reason that they were willing to allege. The end was that he said that he'd not done so ill at Islington that he could not afford to live at ease elsewhere when he chose. And anyway, he said he bore Dr. Quinn no malice. Now, I think I now remember what observation of mine drew him into the train of thought which he next pursued. It was, I believe, my mentioning some juggling tricks which my brother in the East Indies had seen at the court of the Rajah of Mysore. "Convenient thing indeed," said Mr. Abel to me, "if by some arrangement a man could get the power of communicating motion and energy to inanimate objects. As if the axe should move itself against him that lifts it. Something of that kind," I said. "Well, I don't know that was in my mind so much. But if you could summon, for instance, a volume from your shelf, or even order it to open at the right page." He was sitting by the fire. It was a cold evening. And he stretched out his hand, and just then the fire irons, or at least the poker, fell over towards him with a great clatter. And I didn't hear what he said next. But I told him that I could not conceive of such an arrangement, as he termed it, that would not include as one of its conditions a heavier payment than any Christian would care to make. To which he assented. Aye, he said. "But," he added, "I have no doubt these bargains can be made very tempting, can't they? Very persuasive. Still, you would not favour them, eh, Reverend?" No, I suppose not." That is as much as I know of Dr. Abel's mind and the feeling between these two men. I mean, Dr. Quinn, as I said, was a plain, honest creature, and a man to whom I would have gone, in fact, have before now gone for advice on matters of business. He was himself, however, every now and again, and particularly of late, not exempt from troublesome fancies. I mean, there was certainly a time when he was so much harassed by his dreams that he could not keep them to himself, but he would tell them to his acquaintances. I was at supper at his house once, and he was not inclined to let me leave him at my usual time. "If you go now, Doctor," he said, "there'll be nothing for it, but I must go to bed and dream of the chrysalis." "Well, you might be worse off," I said. "I do not think it," he said, and he shook himself like a man displeased with the complexion of his thoughts. "Oh, no, I only meant," I said, "that a chrysalis is an innocent enough thing. This one is not," he said, "and I do not care to think of it." However, sooner than lose my company, he was fain to tell me, because I pressed him, of a dream which he'd come to have several times of late, and even more than once in a night, he said. And it was to this effect. He seemed to wake under a strange compulsion to rise and go out of doors. So he'd dress himself and go down to his garden door, and by the door there stood a spade, which he must take out into the garden. And at a particular place in the shrubbery upon which the moon shone, and there was always a full moon, he said in his dream, he would feel himself compelled to dig. And after some time, the spade would uncover something light-coloured, which he would perceive to be of linen or wool, and this he must clear with his hands. And it was always the same, he said, the size of a man, but shaped like the chrysalis of a moth, with the folds showing a promise of an opening at one end. He could not describe how gladly he would have left at this stage and run to the house, but he must not escape so easily. So with many groans, and knowing only too well what to expect, he parted these folds of stuff, or as sometimes seemed to him, membrane, and disclosed a head covered with a smooth pink skin, which, breaking as the creature stirred, showed him his own face in a state of death. Now, the telling of this dream so much disturbed him that I was forced out of mere compassion to sit with him the greater part of the night. He said that upon every recurrence of his dream he woke, and he found himself, as it were, fighting for his breath. So, the next extract is from Luke Jennett's statement. I never told tales of my master, Dr. Abel, to anybody in the neighbourhood. When I was in another service, I remember speaking to my fellow servants about the matter of the bedstaff, but I'm sure I never said either I or he were the persons concerned, and I met with so little credit that I was affronted and thought it best to keep it to myself. And when I came back to Islington and found Dr. Abel still there, who I was told had left the parish, I was clear that it behoved me to use great discretion, for indeed I was afraid of the man, and it is certain that I was not party to spreading any ill report of him. My master, Dr. Quinn, was a very just, honest man, and no maker of mischief. I'm sure he never stirred a finger, nor said a word by way of inducement to a soul to make them leave going to Dr. Abel and come to him. In fact, he would hardly be persuaded to attend them that did come until he was convinced that if he did not, they would send into town for a physician rather than do as they had hitherto done. I believe it may be proved that Dr. Abel came into my master's house more than once. We had a new chambermaid out of Hertfordshire, and she asked me who was the gentleman that was looking after the master, that is Dr. Quinn, when he was out, and seemed so disappointed that he was out. She said whoever he was, he knew the way of the house well, running at once into the study, and then into the dispensing room, and at last into the bedchamber. I made her tell me what he was like, and what she said was suitable enough to Dr. Abel. And besides, she told me that she saw the same man in church, and someone told her that he was a doctor. It was just after this that my master began to have his bad nights, and complained to me and other persons, in particular, what discomfort he suffered from his pillow and bedclothes. He said that he must buy some more to suit him and would do his own marketing. And accordingly, he brought home a parcel which he said was of the right quality, but where he bought it, we had no knowledge, only they were marked in thread with a coronet and a bird. The woman said that they were of a sort not commonly met with and very fine. And my master said they were the comfortablest that he ever used, and he slept now both soft and deep. Also, the feather pillows, he said, were the best sorted, and his head would often sink into them as if they were a cloud, which I have myself remarked several times when I came to wake him of a morning, his face being almost hid by the pillow closing over it. I never had any communication with Dr. Abel after I came to Islington, but one day he passed me in the street and asked me whether I was not looking for another service, to which I answered that I was very well suited where I was. He said that I was a tickle-minded fellow, and he doubted not he should soon hear I was on the world again, which indeed proved true. And Dr. Pratt, the vicar, is next taken up, where he left off earlier. On the 16th, I was called out of my bed soon after it was light with a message that Dr. Quinn was dead or dying. Making my way to his house, I found there was no doubt which was the truth. All the persons in the house, except the one that let me in, were already in his chamber and standing about his bed, but none touching him. He was stretched in the midst of the bed, on his back without any disorder, and indeed had the appearance of one ready laid out for burial. His hands, I think, were already crossed on his breast. The only thing not usual was that nothing was to be seen of his face, the two ends of the pillow appearing to be closed quite over it. These I immediately pulled apart, at the same time rebuking those present for not at once coming to the assistance of their master. They, however, only looked at me and shook their heads, having evidently no more hope than myself that there was anything but a corpse before us. Indeed, it was plain to anyone possessed of the least experience that he was not only dead, but had died of suffocation. Nor could it be conceived that his death was accidentally caused by the mere folding of the pillow over his face. For how could he not, feeling the oppression, have lifted his hands to put it away, whereas not a fold of the sheet which was closely gathered about him was disordered? The next thing was to procure a physician. I had bethought me of this on leaving my house, and sent on the messenger who had come to me to Dr. Abel. But now I heard that Dr. Abel was away from home, and the nearest surgeon was got, and he, however, could not tell me any more, at least without opening the body, than we already knew. As to any person entering the room with evil purpose, it was visible that the bolts of the door were burst from their stanchions, and the stanchions broken away from the doorpost by main force. And there was a sufficient body of witness, the smith among them, to testify that this had been done but a few minutes before I came. The chamber being, moreover, at the top of the house, the window was neither easy of access, nor did it show any sign of an exit having been made that way, either by marks upon the sill or footprints below upon soft mould. Now, that's the end of Dr. Pratt's statement. The surgeon's evidence forms part of the report of the inquest, but since it has nothing but remarks upon the healthy state of the larger organs and the coagulation of blood in various parts of the body, I don't think I need to quote that. Anyway, the verdict was death by the visitation of God. Now, and next to those other papers is one which I was at first inclined to suppose had made its way among them by mistake. But upon further consideration, I think I can divine a reason for its presence. It relates to the rifling of a mausoleum in Middlesex, which stood in a park which has now been broken up, the property of a noble family, which I will not name. The outrage was not that of an ordinary resurrection man. The object, it seems likely, was theft. Now, the account is blunt and terrible, and I won't quote that either. A dealer in North London suffered heavy penalties as a receiver of stolen goods in connection with the affair. That's it. That's it. You can see why people get a bit annoyed by it, but still, you know, I think it's a good story. I think it's good. I think it's very interesting. It's hang on. There we are. Yeah. No, it's certainly confusing, but I don't think that is necessarily a fault. So there we are. I've hardly had any nuts tonight. So what's going on? Atmosphere. Yeah. I never really know what people mean when they say atmospheric. Do you mean it's hard to pin down? Oh my word, so maybe because Major Brown's such a long story, this will be longer than the usual Nunkie Arms, but maybe. I don't think it is unfinished because it was published in that form. Subtle, yeah. We that phrase "have things all things pleasant about us." It occurs again in the stalls of Barchester Cathedral. The maid who is kind of bribed to remove the stair rod, when she writes a kind of blackmailing letter to Dr. Haynes, she uses that phrase, and it must be a phrase that, you know, L. James came across college scouts or kind of, you know, maid servants using. Jane the maid, that's it. Oh yeah, no, I'd like to be in the. Yeah, well, so there we are. So the Nunkie Arms online, as it stands, this is the last episode. I will be doing live stories in pubs, which is, you know, even better than the Nunkie Arms, perhaps. And yes, the Britain's Protection in Manchester is certainly one that I will go back to. I haven't organised anything yet, but yes, I should say that in April. Look at the website, the schedule on nunkie.co.uk, because there's various things happening in Cambridge and Cambridgeshire in April. I'm doing a guided walk of Cambridge, of looking at sites connected with writers of ghost stories who are in the town. And then anyone out there seen the Archive of Dread? The Archive of Dread, which is the kind of secondary summer show that I've tried to launch for the last 2 years, is having a final attempt to capture the popular imagination in May and June. And I've got about 10 performances around the country of that. And yeah, you know, it's storytelling along these lines. Well, if Nunkie Arms did become a Weatherspoons, at least they would have framed pictures on the wall of some of us, and a little bit of information about it and so on. The spoons. There are things to criticise about it, but all they make a bit of effort. They make a bit of effort with the heritage of their pubs, at least. Oh, did I do it in Preston? Done it in Southport. Maybe you saw it there. Oh, there we are. Burgess. They're actually Burgess Foundation. That's right. Well, I don't know about York. It's fitting that in with kind of when I'm in the area. We'll see. In fact, yeah. What's happening now? Are we out of? Yeah. Well, okay. There's only a few Nerve Centre. There's only a few tickets left for the walk. And they're on Good Friday and I think Easter Sunday, in fact. So take a look at the website. And it's good. I will do it again every so often. I no longer live in. I used to do it quite a lot, but I no longer live in Cambridge, so I fit it in with when I'm there. Oh, York. I'm doing the Archive of Dread at. So look at the website. You'll see all these things. And then I'm also at the moment. One reason I'm staying in this wee house near Whitby is I'm learning lines for a new M.R. James show, but also making plans for an entirely new non-M.R. James show for next summer, of which, if you become a patron on Patreon, you will get advanced news about. But yeah, come to York. Yeah, well, Mora, yeah, well, I just mean, yeah, I don't know how. Whether to Dublin, yeah, well, I hope so. I haven't got anything arranged. I'm also working on a third instalment of these anthologies for the Swan River Press of ghost stories by M.R. James's contemporaries. Yes, Archive of Dread, Leicester Guildhall. Look it up. It's on the website. Yeah, so Dublin. I would like to. In fact, I think I met you, Ian, at that curious little art gallery where I did the reading for Brian Showers. Hopefully, I mean, even if going back there, if nothing else. Yeah. Can you go to a pub afterwards? Well, you can go to a pub. Are you inviting me to the pub with you? It depends on what day. There's a couple where I have to kind of. I've got other engagements in the evening, but Nikki, email me and we'll see. Ideally, this walk that I do would end up with doing a reading of one of the stories I talk about in a pub, but that's so far been a bit difficult to kind of arrange. Ooh. So yeah, well, the one in Cambridge, it kind of, yeah, it's not a long walk. It's just around the centre of Cambridge, stopping off at various places. So now, last of my glass. Thank you for tuning into the Nunkie Arms. I'm just going out. And maybe some time. Our revels now are ended. These are actors, as I foretold you, are all spirits, and are melted into air, into thin air. And like the baseless fabric of this vision, the cloud-capped towers, the gorgeous palaces, the solemn temples, the great globe itself, yea, all which it inherit, shall dissolve. And like this insubstantial pageant faded, leave not a rack behind. We are such stuff as dreams are made on, and our little life is rounded with a sleep.